Kia ora and welcome to PostingCast. My name is John. My pronouns are he and him.
Kia ora, my name's Ross and my pronouns are he or they.
And we are here at the beginning of God knows what. This isn't a bit. It's just been one of those very, very weird days where everything seems to go completely fucking mental for a little bit. We've had 6,000 plus new cases of COVID, although some people are saying it could be up to double that because the testing regime just cannot keep up with the numbers. The encampment outside Parliament, which we spent a couple of episodes talking about, has become a location of interest for last weekend when there were about 3,000 people there. And that's just kind of on the home front. It seems that there's some stuff going on in Europe.
Just a couple of bits and bobs. So we are recording this at about 7 o'clock in the evening on the 24th of February, 2022. I'm saying this because we actually sat and talked about the podcast yesterday, and we were like, we talked about the occupation. The last couple of episodes have been fairly intense. Let's have a bit more of a chilled out one. We'll pick a couple of amusing stuff from Twitter or the news, have a bit of a laugh. Is the Queen dead, or is it someone who was in Queens of the Stone Age? Just to lighten the mood. And then we woke up this morning to find out that the state of Texas has made it illegal to be both a child and transgender, and that was unpleasant. And then the number of cases in New Zealand has skyrocketed at the time that they've decided to have less restrictions on people. And then by afternoon tea, Russia has invaded Ukraine. So, sorry if I had some bits planned. I had been, putting together some things that might, at least made me laugh. So I thought might make other people laugh, but fuck, dude, I don't know. The only joke I've managed to make today is, if the Queen dies today, then surely that's a whole year's worth of news just compacted into 124 hours. And I'm frightened. And I've put that out there, and now I'm going to put the lathe down.
I mean, you're assuming, of course, that the Queen isn't already dead and hasn't already been dead for months.
Well, that too.
What I found really, the Queen being dead, obviously, I think some of you might have seen, you might not have seen. There was an Instagram account run by a former band member of some kind of band that was probably big in America that posted I think it was late Wednesday night or Tuesday night in American time, that the Queen had been found dead. Now, this comes quite hot on the heels of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the Commonwealth Territories being diagnosed with COVID after meeting her son Charles, who also had COVID.
You've got to be careful. If you say her whole name and title 3 times, she appears behind you.
So she's got COVID. This Instagram account was like, Queen's dead. And people start to look it up, and the guy in charge of it even tweeted through it and was like, no, I trust my sources. I'm going to wait for a statement from the palace. And that's a pretty bold move, saying, no, the Buckingham Palace will absolutely put out a statement proving that I am in fact correct. It's a kind of,
it's a bold statement.
It's a poster's brain for the ages, isn't it? And obviously the Queen is not dead, or is she? Did not die the other day, or did she? And today the story has been deleted. An apology has been made because, as Ross pointed out, yesterday we sadly lost Mark Lanigan, one of the great singers of the Seattle grunge scene, and before then, a man who worked his ass off to create some absolutely incredible music. And it turns out that a friend of the guy who runs the Instagram account was very upset that Mark Lanigan was dead, mentioned that he was the singer in Queens because he was an occasional singer of Queens of the Stone Age, and somehow this message has become garbled and become Queen's dead, which is a perfect story. I'm sure Mark Lanigan would, were he still with us, have a good laugh about that, sparking an international social media trending event that Her Majesty the Queen is dead because
he was in a side project.
Yeah, because he was in a side project, which wasn't his best work.
I'll argue with you there, but now's not the time or place. Yeah, it's just, yeah. Where do you go with this? It feels very strange. Like we weren't even sure if we were going to record anything tonight because I don't know enough about either Russia or Ukraine or international geopolitics to really make any kind of informed statement. And I'm going to go on the record and say the chances are, if you're listening to this, you don't either.
But we are podcasting through it. We are podcasting through our ignorance, much like we are posting through it, bringing you the finest in liberal hot takes and soy radical bullshit, which is, what we do, I guess. What I liked about the Queen's Dead thing is that the Queen's Dead thing is the new Thatcher's Dead in terms of online for years and years and years, from even before Twitter and Facebook. Like on the forums, occasionally someone would post, "She's dead, lads. Thatcher is finally dead." And it would kind of sweep across different forums you were on, and people were like, whoa, yeah, they're going to announce it. Nah, she's not fucking dead. And then it was on Twitter as well. It would trend occasionally, "Thatcher's dead." And in the end, you kind of got used to it. You were just like, yeah, right. And some people were like, yeah, but, you have all of these false alarms. It's like the boy who cries wolf. When she actually dies, it's not going to have as much of an impact. To which I can say, yes, it did. Fucking great week. Had a lovely time about nearly 10 years ago now, when Thatcher finally fucking stroked out in the Ritz Hotel. She deserved to go to hell. Could we say that about the Queen? I don't know. Would she die of shame after bailing her son out for the tune of probably nearly about $20 million because he's a nonce? Who can say? But she is going to go at some point. So Queen might be dead now. Queen might be dead already. Queen is going to be dead soon.
I really appreciate the way that they've been trailing the whole Queen is dead thing, just for the last few months, sort of moving her out of the headlines. And, you absolutely do not gotta hand it to him, but Prince Nonce sort of taking it upon himself to become the main story for a while, to take the focus off her until she decides to bail him out for something that he didn't do with someone that he claims he's never met. Just making that clear. He's just given her £12 million for vibes, because that's what you do when you're absolutely definitely not guilty of doing something awful, is you pay them off.
Well, it's not shit posters. It's not just shit posters who are just like, Queen's dead, Queen's dead, Queen's dead, and who are getting behind the hype train on this one. I mean, she got COVID after meeting Charles, who also had COVID. I'm just saying, Charles is on board, man. Charles has got an alt account. He's trying to get this moving, man. He wants to make the people happy.
He's taken one of those influencer courses on how to extend your reach. He's read The Secret and is manifesting. He's just trying to will it into existence, and
jabbing at a tiny Apple phone with his huge sausage fingers.
Totally normal. Yeah, absolutely normal island, normal family. Everything's fine there. But as of it's now 7:20, Queen still not dead, as far as we know. I'm not even going to check Twitter about it, because fuck knows what's happened in the last 10 minutes. So
yeah.
It's no, it's just weird times. And what do? Do you post through it? One of the jobs that I do is provide support to young people who are struggling with somewhat ironically sort of social isolation and anxiety and things. And one of the things I keep coming back to when I'm working with them is just it's okay to not be okay, because this is absolutely 100% not normal what we're going through. This is for those of us who are older, we might remember a time way back when. It's called 2019. And some of us who are even older than that might remember the 90s, which was the end of history. And that time's definitely not coming back, because we've passed the end of history, and now we're into this weird epilogue. Either that, or someone's rebooted the series, having dropped a lot of acid. But yeah, one of the things that I'm dealing with a lot with people, and also kind of with myself, is a sense of there's this concept of ambiguous loss, this idea of grief for something that isn't concrete. So ambiguous loss around the idea of, I don't know, your entire way of life and everything that you know that was normal has now disappeared due to the pandemic. And on top of the pandemic, we've had we're not quite calling it an insurrection, but almost. Like, it is still dragging on. This has been over 2 weeks now. We've had the incredible sight, for those of you that haven't seen it, of a forklift truck carrying pallets and what must have been about 100 cops flanking this single forklift with its pallets in order to do something with the police cordon around the occupation in Wellington. Quite why they had so many cops and only one forklift tells you everything you need to know about the funding of the police versus funding of other organizations. But there you go.
The real emergency services are the forklift drivers.
Saluting our brave comrades with the Cat 2 license. Yeah,
it's interesting. Like you talked about that kind of sense of grief, and that kind of the longing for something that's not quite material. It's awfully hauntology.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of what,
you know what I mean. Kind of like what would have been. I mean,
sounding the hauntology klaxon.
Yeah, the hauntology klaxon is going off in the background. All of my Mark Fisher books are spontaneously bursting into flames, but this kind of the future being cancelled. Like, life was meant to be different than this for the last few years, but then we got a once in a century, almost literally pandemic, and it has has it exacerbated tensions and things like that within nations? Absolutely. Has it like caused a hell of a lot of like probably unnecessary deaths? Yes. Has it demonstrated to people that lots of states are themselves quite corroded and incapable of actually looking after their citizens or doing anything but punishing them? Absolutely. And that kind of failure kind of threads through the pandemic. It threads through the the incoming economic crisis that was kind of due even before Russian troops started flowing over the Ukrainian border. And you just kind of go, okay, what was the alternative here? Because life before this wasn't great. There was there was a lot of problems, but this just seems to be kind of accelerationism for the bad guys. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, it's funny. I'm listening to there's a podcast at the moment called White Hot Hate, which is all about white supremacist terror cells in Canada and in the US, and they talk about accelerationism and the race war. And one of the things that I found really interesting listening to it, I'm about halfway through just now, is the Christchurch shooter has been mentioned, and I appreciate, given that it's a foreign podcast, I've not mentioned him by name. Has been mentioned in almost every episode, and it's wild. First off, hearing these guys talking openly about, like, in the podcast, these guys that they're talking about killing a couple who they believe are active anti-fascists. They're talking, like, they're talking about inciting a race war. They're talking about like sowing chaos and everything else, and it's weird to hear a foreign podcast talking about an event that happened in New Zealand as being like one of the central like role models for this kind of thing, and then you see him like posters featuring his face and his name and stuff at the protest, and you see all this other stuff, and it's like, yeah, this is the call is coming from inside the house. This stuff is, people have been warning us about this for a really long time, and now it really is starting to feel like it's here.
It's interesting that you talk about it like that, because obviously we don't really see the influence of what happened on March 15th in New Zealand as directly, or we are starting to now. But as you said, this podcast has tracked around the world to the far right, the white supremacist movement, the neo-fascist movement. He is canonized. He is treated like he's a hero. And in Norway, Anders Breivik was treated the same way. He was he was the one before this. In the kind of like the people they look up to. And it's always interesting to look at what these individuals themselves say are their inspiration. What inspired them to do it. And in Anders Breivik's case, it was things like Melanie Phillips, who writes for the Times in the UK, and people like that.
Interesting. It's just like a sidebar. So Melanie Phillips is just an appalling human being. Please do not search out her stuff unless you've got some really strong bleach for your mind afterwards. But this is a woman who, they say, mentioned in the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto. She recently, and has had no consequences for that. Because she's a person of column from the UK and they never experience consequences. But she recently did a column about how tattoos were an affront to her and made her feel physically sick. And I saw like the most poisoned, lib-brained response to that, which was someone got a massive tattoo of a literal fascist on their, like a lifelike tattoo of her on their ass, saying that line about tattoos making them feel physically sick. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's the own that you think it is, my dude.
This is like the people paying Nigel Farage to say Chucky Allah and stuff like that. It's like you just gave the guy 50 quid.
Yeah, this is a grift to them.
Yeah, he just made money off you. Like the easiest thing you do, tell him to fuck off on social media because it's free. Don't pay the man. Don't pay the man to debase himself. He's already debases himself enough as part of his everyday fucking job. Just oh my god. And also, person of column, what the fuck, dude? Don't be dropping that in and expecting it goes unmentioned.
Person of column. Oh, that's not mine. I've got to doff my cap to the great Hussein Kisfani for that one.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I mean, we talk about these things and like these inspirations, and there are no consequences for the people who inspire kind of these individuals. They just aren't, because a lot of those people are very close to power. They are kind of the acceptable face of the right wing, and according to them, it's not their fault when years of stoking Islamophobia ends up with lots of dead people, or pointing at the left and saying, "Oh well, they're on the side of the Muslims," and then suddenly you have lots of dead people, and they just go, "Well, I wasn't to know. I wasn't me," and you just go, "All right, okay, no consequences, fine, let's move on." And you think about that in terms of the current Wellington protest and the people who are in there, the people who are attaching themselves to it for the coverage rather than the cause. And you're like, consequences, are there going to be any? No. I mean, given that it's a COVID hotspot and the bad polling that was done said that 75% of them are unvaccinated, there are going to be some natural consequences from this, but there are also ones that are going to fuck up everything for everyone else. So like, people being on hospital wards when they really didn't have to be.
Yeah, like there's no winners here. And I guess part of it is stochastic terrorism is a very difficult word to spell, so I can see why a lot of the commentariat like don't understand it. It's like we've seen this week, there was a fascist who'd become obsessed with the idea of killing Black Lives Matter protesters, shot dead a 6-year-old woman in Portland because she was taking part in a sort of defensive anti-fascist action. You've seen Phil Arps, well-known Christchurch Nazi and owner of the white supremacist flooring company, which is...
He's the one who calls himself Arpsy the Nazi. Yeah. What a dude.
Such an intense Christchurch vibe that... we talked about him last week, but also he's once again trying to get back to Wellington so that he can stage an execution. Like there's so many people for whom the step towards committing something atrocious is very, very small. And we're starting to, those chickens, and which I think a lot of us have seen for a long time, are increasingly coming towards the roost. But speaking of that stochastic terrorism, like it kind of feeds into as well what's happening in Texas. So the governor of Texas has decreed, as much as these guys ever can, that if you are the parent, if you work in any kind of child-facing organization and there is a transgender child that you are working with, you are apparently bound by law now to report them to the authorities as a case of child abuse, and and if the parents are affirming of that child's gender, then the child can be taken off them. And it's incredible watching these utterly brain poisoned people who've done nothing but scream about trans people using bathrooms and trans people existing in general, sort of suddenly doing the, oh, never thought me baiting all these leopards to go and eat all those faces, and now they're starting to eat all those faces. Who could have predicted it? And it's like, everybody, you dipshit, everybody. And it's terrifying seeing how everybody, like around the world, what happens abroad increasingly happens over here, just late, diluted, and sort of pineapple lumps flavored. And it's like, oh, I wonder what this looks like 5 years down the line.
Yeah, I tell you who I haven't heard from in the last week. I tell you who's been pretty quiet. Dr. Bryce
Edwards.
Distinct lack of videos down there now. Things have actually got a little bit active, shall we say? But it is interesting how a lot of people have suddenly gone quiet on that. You know what I mean? Let's talk about this in like terms which kind of get away from the actual thing of the protest, but also talk about the underlying causes. Some of the underlying causes are people like Steve Bannon, Counterspin, like Kelvin Aup, just outright neo-fascist people who promote a documentary which says that March 15th was a false flag, for instance, and tries to sell large copper coils to help you devaccinate yourself, which are meant to sit in between.
Basically, it looks like someone really misunderstood how hot knives work.
Really, really big fucking knife. Get your machete out, lads. We're doing some dots. But you talk about it, and some people have tried to talk about this, but they were talking about it and saying, oh, well, you've got to understand these people. And it's like, yeah, I mean, there has been fertile ground for the right wing and far right in this country, in the fact that there is a lot of people who are doing it tough. You know what I mean? There are a lot of people who are economically stretched. And part of that is because, despite all of the interesting and beneficial kind of social changes which the Ardern government is bringing in, they effectively have just said, yeah, actually doing any of the structural change stuff is way too fucking hard for us. So we're just not going to bother, And in the first term, it was, oh, well, we can't do it because Winston won't let us, we can't do CGT. We can't do this. We can't do that. We got all these working groups and they told us exactly what we needed to do to reduce inequality, but we're not fucking doing it. And this term, it's been, I think it was 2 years ago, Graham Robertson saying, oh, in Parliament, he said, someone said to me the other day, well, if your house burned down, you wouldn't rebuild it in exactly the same way, would you? And he was talking about how COVID would impact upon the New Zealand economy. And his argument was, obviously, we're going to make big changes. So what he did was none of that. Absolutely none of it. That was like about a month or two before he introduced that dole for rich people, like the benefit for people who are used to actually having money, so they wouldn't possibly be able to survive on normal WINS payments. And, paying money out to companies which may have used some of that money to fund the occupation down in Wellington and things like that.
We love to see it. Yeah.
There was no, there have been no effective measures on housing. The market itself is falling over because everything is going very, very cool and normal at the minute. But that isn't because of government intervention. And it's like they've shown absolutely no interest in that. They have very, I think they were trumpeting today, oh, we've lifted 66,000 children out of poverty. And I'm just like, yeah, but things are still fucking dire out there. And when you put people in tightened economic situations, when there doesn't appear to be any relief, because this is the Labour government, these are meant to be the kind of the good guys, like the people who are doing it tough now, like at the bottom end of society, are the ones who know that should National get back in, it's going to get worse. So from their point of view, what have they got to lose? Why not? Why not believe all the stuff you read on Facebook and be like, well, yeah, this is all fucked up and nobody's coming to help us, so we're going to do something ourselves, which is not in any way a justification of what is happening in Wellington, but it is this government have governed consistently towards the centre and keeping things as they are because they're afraid that changing things too much will lose them votes. And all they've got out of it is that they are still called communists, they are still called socialists, they are still accused of all of the things that they would never actually have the fucking balls to do in the first place. And in about 6 years' time, or 3 or 4 years' time, when they eventually lose power, we will look back on like 9 years of a Labour government, 3 years of it with an overwhelming majority, and we'll be like, what the fuck was the point then? You know, because when we look at it, it's going to be cool. We got some LGBTQ rights. Yep, healthy home stuff, pretty decent. But in terms of, look at what you could have fucking won, they're going to continually be slagged for being too socialist, too left wing. But my God, if they were only the cool Labour Party that the right wing imagine they are, things would probably be a bit better in this country. And I doubt that the far right would have such an extensive like breeding ground for their bullshit. Do you know what I mean? Like, actually get hanged for the fucking wolf you are rather than pretend to be a sheep. Sorry. Anyway.
Oh, and it's a great example of that whole the maxim that the liberals do not learn lessons. Like we've seen over and over again that a centrist government gets in promising lots of vague social democracy, and then almost like overnight there seems to be some kind of weird brainworms comes in which goes, but what about that the right-wing voters who would never vote for us anyway, who we have a majority over? What are we going to do to court them? Never mind all of the people who voted for us on the platform that we stood on. What about this group of people who have always despised us, will always despise us, will continue to despise us? How can we capture that vote too? So they abandon the people who actually voted for them in order to chase. Like, you don't need to chase the fascist vote ever. Like, I really don't see. I'd love to hear the mental gymnastics required. Do you know who we really need to court? You know what I mean? To really bring on side racists.
Well, you got to get Greg O'Connor elected somehow.
It's and you see it time and time again. And I would have thought that, in the age of the internet and having a basic fucking understanding of how these things work, New Zealand Labour might have looked abroad and gone, hang on, this might not end very well for us. And maybe we should just try and make things a little bit better somehow, but apparently not. And that's not to, I mean, we are standing on the threshold of there being fewer restrictions due to COVID and case numbers which are still nowhere near peaked. Like, we have gone from, I was looking, because I'm not a wrestling fan, but I am familiar with some of the terms. I actually had to go and Google like biggest heel turns in WWE history, and apparently this is an equivalent of Hulk Hogan joining the NWO, which takes on very slightly conspiracy theorist tones in these times. But yeah, just the very quick movement from lots of restrictions and saving lots of lives to we're going on a more sort of UK style vibes based approach to COVID now. And I get it. I mean, I've seen a couple of people saying online, well, you've got to understand that there's a really good one about Maslow's hierarchy of needs doesn't just include not catching COVID. It also has things like people need to be fed, power stations still need to be working, people who require emergency surgery should still be able to get that. And I understand that, and I understand on one level why there's enough people with COVID now that if everybody isolates who we would have had isolating 6 months ago, then everything sort of grinds to a halt. But also there's an extreme amount of sort of psychic whiplash you take from having gone from, like, 6 months ago we were all in lockdown for months because we had cases that almost got in, like 80 cases a day. I think it got, like, the highest it got was still in the low hundreds, and it's confirmed 6,000 cases today. However many more than that is the actual number, who knows? And the government have gone, for example, if you're a teacher, unless some kid like actually spits in your mouth, or
Ew.
then you don't have to self-isolate and you're not a close contact. And it's like, classrooms have been the butt of jokes around being petri dishes for longer than there have been classrooms. The idea that suddenly it's like, oh no, you're all good, it's such an about face. It's hard to look at it dispassionately. or look at it objectively.
Yeah, it's the conversations that I'm having, like at work in the minute, are focused around this, and it's kind of everyone is like, oh well, so we just expected like we're on our own effectively, you know. If you get it, you get it, and it's definitely around. It's in our town, but because they're not updated in locations of interest, because contact tracing has essentially collapsed, except for, I mean, I say collapse, they've just stopped doing it for most things, unless it's like a flight or something like that. Actually, I was talking about someone with this today, and they said, well, you know, I want to go to the gym, but if I go to the gym and I get COVID at the gym and bring it home and give it to my kids, and they take it to their school, or I bring it into work as well, then that means I'm the person who brings it in. And like, I went through this process myself when we moved down here, and I was like, if I'm getting tested, because I do not want to be patient zero for the town. And thank goodness I wasn't. But people don't want to be the person who brings it into their workplace.
Yeah.
And people are having to make this thing. But also there's this other vibe, which those of us who have anxiety and other fun things that make our brain like freak out might not be noticing. There is the, well, we're going to get it, we might as well get it and get it over with now, rather than just waiting. And some of that is, oh well, if we get it, then we'll get immunity, and then we won't be able to get it again. And I went, I'm not sure that's how COVID works. You can get it a few times. You will get some immunity, but it's not long lasting. It's not like you get it and then you're done. And so someone like just went, really? And I was like, yeah, you can catch COVID a few times.
Just look at Bolsonaro.
Like, yeah, look at Jair Bolsonaro. The man has had COVID every single day for the last few years. Like, just every day he's going around licking all the doorknobs in the hospital, sucking on the drips, trying to get some sweet COVID,
rubbing himself up against Wellington street crossings.
Yeah, but it is that some people are like, oh, I'd rather get it and get it over with, and I'm just like, are you sure about that? Are you sure you want to get this? We know what it does. We know how dangerous it is. Are you sure you want to get it? And there is kind of a, like you said, everyone's having to make these personal judgments on whether or not they're going to get it, or what they have to do, or how they have to behave. And for those of our comrades who are immunosuppressed, this is a literal life and death situation for them. But the general message is, well, don't worry about it, everyone's going to get it anyway. It's kind of, it's like the state pulling back and going, well, you're on your own now, we've done everything we can, but what are we going to do? And that doesn't, it does seem that unions and other organizations don't seem to have been quite as strident in the protection of workplaces and workers as possible, because we've been told that Omicron is less dangerous, but it's not. It's still quite dangerous.
Omicron's like public communications have been absolutely phenomenal. Like, you cannot fault the advertising that has gone out about, and almost on every platform as well. Like, I almost every news service I have seen has been like, Omicron is not as bad, Omicron is quite mild. And yeah, in the same way that getting a brick dropped on you is milder than getting a safe dropped on you, like both are bad. And it feels, I don't want to be the one who's sounding very tinfoil hat and conspiracy theory, but we have kind of seen this in the past before from the New Zealand government, where there is a little bit of a PR push before something changes to kind of get us prepped for it. Almost, we saw it before Delta, where suddenly there were a couple of soft soap stories about, oh, here's Dr. Ashley Bloomfield getting his COVID test. Here's us talking about, well, you might want to stock up on XYZ because you never know what's coming. And then a couple of weeks later, and I'm not saying that these things are planned, but they obviously have forecasting and trends. But this whole Omicron is not that bad. Omicron is quite mild. And suddenly it's, well, congratulations, here it is. And it's,
yeah.
But what we've got now is we've got people who are not taking it seriously. And there's we still don't know what this thing does. The people talking about brain fog for months afterwards. Like, so brain fog makes it sound cute. I mean, that's brain damage. The brain is not a fucking terrarium. It's not. It doesn't get foggy. Like, it doesn't sort of suddenly. You don't get a bad case of brain condensation. Like, brain fog is a damaged brain. People have got diabetes. People have got all kinds of things, and it's these are issues not just for now, but we're creating a whole group of people who are going to require additional care for a very long time to come, and we do not have a healthcare system that's particularly good at dealing with that.
Which again kind of leads us back to wow, it would be nice if this Labour government had done some Labour shit in the last, I don't know, 5 years that they've had in charge. Sure would be nice. Sure would be nice to have some socialism in this social democracy rather than this kind of relentless focus on, oh, well, we can't lose votes. And it's like, well, if you don't do anything with them, what's the fucking point of voting for you anyway? Not that anyone on this podcast actually voted for Labour at the last 2 elections anyway, because, what's the fucking point? There just isn't anymore. Like, I don't want a Labour government. I just want revenge.
Also, if anyone's listening outside of New Zealand, we have MMP, so
yeah,
you can actually vote for minor parties and have an effect.
You can actually vote for a minor party and it actually matters, which is kind of sweet, I guess.
You can do it for reasons other than clout.
I mean, I guess it's probably, the Labour government have played a real blinder here by keeping the Omicron variant busy enough doing its own PR that Chris Luxon can't hire it to run national. Chris Luxon, he's not as bad as Judith Collins. It's pretty much the message they're going for anyway,
Brick safe analogy once again. Yeah.
Calling Judith Collins a brick.
Sure. It's, yeah. I don't know. That feels like kind of a good place to leave it. I'm feeling pretty.
Actually, no, there is a little bit more. We're not going to talk about Ukraine and Russia and all of that right now because we're not experts. There's no point. This is literally a developing situation as we are recording this evening. Mike Duncan, who does the Revolutions podcast, has recently released an episode called Anarchy in Ukraine, which is about the kind of post-1917 Russian Revolution and the anarchists in Ukraine at that time. It is a fascinating episode. He had no idea when he released it that this week was going to be quite so busy. But I think it's important to say that we talked a little bit about what was going on in Texas and the way that the American state is just absolutely, apparently fundamentally incapable of protecting its own citizens has been revealed again and again and again. The fact they spend billions on their military is obscene while people starve and their police shoot people down in the streets. They treat trans people like fucking animals. They are not the good guys. Okay? Neither is Russia. Russia is a brutal, horrible autocratic state run by a guy who probably should be dead by now, but isn't. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the cheerleading. Well, the Putin bad, so opposition to him must be good. And if you look at all of the states at play here, there's not a single one of them that if you're left wing, you look at and go, yeah, that's the one for me. Okay. And there's only one thing you can do in that situation, and that's express solidarity with the people of Ukraine who they don't want this. I'm pretty certain the people of Russia don't want this either. And most of the countries in NATO would be like, yeah, nobody wants a fucking land war in Europe. But these decisions are always taken by people above like the normal people's heads. The geopolitics at play here are not for the likes of us to interfere in any meaningful way because we are simply not allowed to.
Yeah, I think that's and that's something that I think about when I look at Twitter and stuff, and just this idea of we should do something, and for the most part, horrifyingly, in a lot of the stuff, you can't. But we're witness to it in ways that we have never been witnesses to these things before, and with that like this sort of almost parasocial relationship with what's happening elsewhere, it can be. There's a weird feeling of helplessness around, well, we should be able to affect this stuff, but we really can't.
Yeah, and because of that, we got this upper layer of like all of these the powerful people, often quite rich people in capital, and how it works in kind of forming these struggles for territory, struggles for empire, various imperialisms against imperialisms. And what you get in the underlayer now is those who buy into the, oh well, they're bad, so we must be the good guys, kind of turn on the anti-war movement and say, well, this is your fault. You've given Putin cover to invade Ukraine by demanding that there be no war. And
saw that in the UK, didn't we?
Yeah. If the anti-war movement was as powerful as these bow tie briefcase dipshits think they are, then obviously there probably wouldn't be a war. But there's not. All the Stop the War movement tends to do is just go, hey, this is probably a really bad fucking idea. And no, they don't always get it right. There are times when it's just like, Jesus Christ. And yet, blaming the anti-war movement for there being war doesn't make any fucking sense at all. Because all they say is, no, we shouldn't do this. This is a problem. And often, quite often have a more realistic understanding of the powers at play rather than we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, because it is never that simple. God, can we get over that kind of base reductionism to some kind of sports team thing? We can focus on our real sports teams rather than this. But this, we express solidarity with the people of Ukraine, because of course we do. The people of Russia, there are the anti-authoritarian, the peace movement in Russia, honestly, are braver than any fucking troops, because they're having to go up against a state which is kind of unrelenting in its willingness to crush them. Yeah. The anti-war movement in Ukraine as well, the same. They are out there, they are comrades, they are struggling, okay? And kind of reducing it to, well, they've got neo-Nazis and they've got neo-Nazis. Yeah, it turns out both sides do.
We've got neo-Nazis. What are you talking about?
Yeah, we've got neo-Nazis. Guess what? It looks like it's a feature, not a bug.
Our neo-Nazis can stand in front of Christchurch police station and make death threats, and the
get a hug from a cop and all that. Yeah,
get a hug from a cop. You didn't see much of that at Ihumata. So,
but yeah, that's the kind of then I think that's the place to leave it. And it's like, this situation sucks. Nobody likes it. It's horrible. We're going to have to prepare for the unknown, which means we can't really prepare for it that well, except go off what we know before. There's going to be refugees. There's going to be a crisis. Aid agencies are going to need our help. It is time for us to support the people who are caught in the middle of these states having a big dick measuring match because of the Russian Empire or because of NATO or because of whatever the fuck, man. The people in the middle of this do not deserve to have cruise missiles dropped on their heads. They don't deserve to be cowering in their homes. And yet they will be. And rather than picking a side in the conflict, trying to support those people caught up in it is probably a far better use of our time in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
Also, the Queen's dead. Yay!
To put the lathe down. Yeah, we considered whether we should actually record anything tonight, but we have. And if you've made it this far and haven't been totally blackpilled, then thank you very much. Next week, we are really, really lucky. We have got Byron Clark coming to have a chat with us. Thank you very much for listening, and catch you next week.
I'd argue that this isn't that blackpilled. That last bit is hope. There is something we can do. There will be things that we can do in the upcoming weeks, and it is absolutely imperative that we get on board and get on with it, and don't just stick a Ukrainian flag in your profile picture and spend your time going, oh, isn't Putin a bad man? Let's try and help the Ukrainian people as much as we can at this time. Anyway, we'll see you next week where, yes, we'll be talking to Byron. Have a good one. Log off.
All right, Dad.